Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to talk about RMF, three letters that have been sending chills throughout the entire defense infrastructure. Because for the last 2 years, organizations that conduct cybersecurity and information technology security measures have been undergoing a seismic shift in the way governance is performed. RMF, or Risk Management Framework for DoD IT, represents not a minor or evolutionary transition, but a radical shift in the way we approach. And it's particularly so for those who've been in this business for a while. Those like myself who can remember the Rainbow series and DIACAP and DIACAP and everything that's come a long way, know that this time we're actually being asked to change our whole way of thinking and managing the process. Now, technology moves as it moves, incrementally. Sometimes revolutionary changes happen, but it's a steady train of progress. But management styles and management systems can sometimes change radically, and this is one of those cases. Now, in the course, we go into all the different details, and we look at all aspects that information security professionals need to know in order to adjust to this transition. In fact, we go through every single control out of the thousands of controls that you may have to review, including the actual control correlation identifiers, or CCIs. In any case, right now, what I just want to talk about is some of the broad stroke changes that we're looking at as this transition continues in the way. First, the overarching differences between this and the previous model, which was the CNA model, as managed through the DIACAP program. The CNA model is based on the presumption, a thought, that there is a standard of protection that you can reach, and when you achieve that standard, you can certify and accredit the system for use within national security infrastructure systems. But really, when you think about it, that whole model is fallacious. No system is ever really secure. We only think it's secure based on what we know could be exploited or could be done to the system. Perhaps you remember just a few years ago, we thought SSL was a secure mechanism for protecting data in transit. And yet, when Heartbleed broke out, we found out with a rude awakening that the systems we thought were secure really weren't. Now, did anything change? We changed. Our understanding changed. Our sense of reality is what changed. With that came all sorts of SACOs and command actions and emergency mitigations to deal with a risk that was now known. And that's the beauty of the RMF model. It takes for granted, it doesn't take for granted this truth, this reality, that there is no such thing as achieving a secure state, but rather the pursuit of security and the management of the risks to that security. So we look at our systems in a context of being subject to persistent threats, ever-changing and ever-present threats. And with that, the idea that we can ever establish a rubber stamp and call something secure and thus certify and accredit it is really not a correct way to approach security governance. So the first thing, and probably the biggest change with RMF, is getting rid of that whole model of CNA and instead pursuing a CM model, or continuous monitoring approach. Now, with continuous monitoring, we may still go through an initial cycle that leads us to an authority to operate, an ATO, like we did under the CNA models. But ultimately, even the concept of an ATO will be moot as we focus in on consistent operations and consistent security functionality. Another distinct difference with this approach is the level of detail, in fact granularity, of the way we measure the implementation of security, our security controls. Where DIACAP contained just over 150 controls, RMF has hundreds. And when you look at the individual subcontrols or specific identifiable actions that need to be taken, there are in fact thousands of controls in the RMF model. Now, while this, in terms of level of effort, is intimidating, even shocking and disturbing, it ultimately leads eventually to less work because we have detailed, specific, individualized controls as opposed to broad, nebulous controls. With that, you know exactly what you're missing in terms of an individual CCI, an individual identifier. Although initially identifying all of those controls is a tedious process, in expanding our level of effort from DIACAP processes dramatically. But even though that is a dramatic change in the initial workload, once we actually have control, our clear picture of our governance apparatus, what we're capable to achieve in terms of managing security is much improved. Now, those are the two overarching or two primary differences. So in addition to these two major differences, there's also an interesting difference in the approach to security from a governance perspective. For instance, most organizations think of cybersecurity or information security in terms of technology, in terms of what you're doing at the perimeter, firewalls and detectors and sensors and so forth, what you're doing in the code, application security, secure programming techniques and so forth. In other words, we look at information security through a bit of a lens of what the NIST defines as security functionality. But with RMF, security functionality is only one half of the equation for having a trustworthy information security management system. The other half is security assurance or trustworthiness. See, when trustworthiness is achieved, it means that we've not just taken certain precautions, implemented certain countermeasures, enabled or executed certain security controls. It actually means that the effectiveness of those controls to achieve the intended purpose is something that we can actually rest at night with. We're assured that the goal is being met. Now, in order to achieve security assurance, there's an intentional level of dissonance that RMF creates. And this is by design. Where in the past, you could have one cybersecurity team or information assurance team or computer security team, as we called it before then, that's responsible for applying security measures to your systems. And then once that's done, then someone just certifies it as being correct. Now, under RMF, this structure is divided into two distinct groups. There's a cybersecurity team that is responsible for doing, that is the implementation and execution of security. And then there is a whole other cybersecurity team that's dedicated to the function of checking. So it's like the Deming cycle, where we have plan, do, check, and act. There's a do side and a check side. Now you could say that we've always had that, and it's true, we've always had validators and so forth. But the intensity and the rigor with which they were required to actually test the systems beyond the initial T&E phase was not necessarily all that it could be. See, during a test and evaluation cycle where you're doing survivability testing and so forth, such operational and developmental tests can be very comprehensive, very rigorous. But that's not really what was done during the ATO cycle with a DIACAP accreditation or some other CNA approach. In some cases, information assurance could even be reduced to a paper chase. With RMF, the role of the Security Control Assessor, the SCA, is actually intended to take whatever was done by the security team on the do side and beat the heck out of it. Evaluate whether it's there, whether it's done correctly. And ultimately, the most important aspect is at an individual control level for the SCA to determine that the controls are actually performing their intended function. See, security control effectiveness is the objective of an assessment with RMF, not simply a checklist identifying that a particular control is in place. For instance, you may have host-based security, HBSS, turned on, but all the systems subscribe to it. What configuration has been put in place? Are all the systems rolling up to the same policy orchestrator, EPO server? Is it actually looking at the full breadth of the system? And then what plugins and panels and options have been enabled? So it's one thing to have it and check a box that says that something exists. It's something else entirely to identify whether that control is actually doing what we meant for it to do. So organizations are finding that there is a need to adjust the way their teams are organized, the qualifications of persons in the validation role as well as the implementation role. In fact, really, those who are in the evaluation role, assessors, those who work for the SCA organizations within DoD or that will come to exist, these will need to have superior technical expertise in many cases to those who are actually implementing the security measures. Whatever the case is, there's intended to be parity. And that's a big culture change for many national security organizations, and really many organizations, period. In the past, information security was something that was off in a corner in a room, something that was added to the overall core information technology functions of the organization. Some even refer to it as fence builders. You know, building the fence is important, but it's not the core work. However, the profile of cybersecurity is changing quite dramatically with RMF. You may have even noticed, across the entire federal infrastructure, the role of cybersecurity has been elevated, and it's continuing to be elevated. I mean, just Cybercom alone. US Cybercom is not a 1, 2, or even 3-star organization. It's a 4-star organization. The deputy's a 3-star. That outranks many organizations across the enterprise. And that doesn't tell you the new change in focus from fence building to core critical mission. Then there are a few things that would. In the course, we go through all of this and much, much more to assist you to be effective in actually making this transition, to change in thinking, the change in implementation, the change in operations, even the culture change, so that in the end, we will implement RMF in the best possible way for your organization. Thank you for your time.